This is an example of a typical CAMS analysis session. I'm using a perplexity project called CAMS 2026, and I've uploaded a set of databases, data sets, ensemble data sets scored by 5 agents with a corresponding envelope data set that records standard deviations, and that's the whole set. And my prompt was look across the ensemble data sets in files. Then I just cut and paste the files that I'd loaded into the project. And then the prompt continues, conduct a full CAMS examination, give a data-driven reading of the Mythopoetics of each nation, their cognitive-affective signature. Then you can see what's happened is the Perplexity AI engine's done a few, previewed the data sets, searched the data sets for relevant variables, ran a few functions, loaded particular data sets, Thailand and Sweden, just loading the ensemble set as well. Germany, running a few scripts, then it's created a few images. And then I asked for a deep report, and so that's what I'm getting. The first is a heat map showing the health of the society from the systems point of view, from healthiest to least healthy. And then a similar ranking of mean node value by nation, which puts the UK the highest of this set, and Argentina on the other side. So this is a CAMS examination of 7 nations in 2026: the United States, the UK, Germany, Sweden, Argentina, and Thailand. It's not a conventional political comparison, it's a systems reading, an attempt to look beneath the headlines and ask, what is the functional condition of each society as a complex adaptive system? So CAMS reads the society through 8 functional nodes: Helm, Shield, Law, Stewards, Craft, Hands, Archive, and Flow. Each node is scored for coherence, capacity, stress, and abstraction. From those measures, we can derive a kind of institutional physiology, where the system is thinking, where it is feeling strain, where it retains memory, where it is losing coupling, and where it may be approaching fracture. The subtitle matters: Mythopoetic and Cognitive-Affective Signatures. The report is not just asking whether society is strong or weak, it's asking what kind of soul posture each society appears to be occupying. Well, the first thing to notice is the bifurcation. These 7 societies are not simply distributed along a smooth spectrum from healthy to unhealthy. They fall into distinct structural zones. The United Kingdom appears as a high coordination The United Kingdom appears as a high coordination archive anchored system. Russia and Germany occupy an oscillating middle, stressed but still coupled. Sweden shows a late abstraction signature, sophisticated, symbolic, perhaps over-intellectual under stress. Thailand shows a distinctive Praetorian tension, where shield remains strong while archive weakens. Then we have the United States and Argentina. These are fracture risk cases. The USA is alarming. Um, because its Helm law notes, governance and legitimacy, are near terminal values while Shield remains comparatively strong. Argentina is different. Its distress is more uniform, more exhausted, closer to systemic inertia. So the core finding is not simply that some nations are doing better than others, is that each is failing, adapting, or stabilizing in a different mode. So, um, the CAMS framework section. Each section gives the first is social cognition, or SC. This is a ratio between abstraction and coherence. In plain language, it asks, is a node processing reality concretely, or is it operating through high symbolic abstraction? The second is national affect, or NA. This is capacity minus stress. It asks, does the node have, energetic surplus, or is it under an affective deficit? When high abstraction is paired with positive affect, the system may be in generative coherence. But when high abstraction is paired with negative affect, we get something more dangerous, late abstraction, disassociation, or symbolic overproduction under material strain. This is a crucial CAMS insight. A society can still talk beautifully while its functional substrate is failing. Indeed, late systems often become more symbolic precisely because the material world has become harder to manage. The table is the diagnostic map. The UK sits at the top with a mean node value of 10.65, positive affect and high bond strength. It's not utopian, but it's coordinated. Russia, Germany, Russia, Sweden, and Germany cluster in the middle. Their mean values are close, but their internal signatures differ. Russia is coherent under stress. Germany is stable, but anxious around flow. Sweden is highly abstract, which is both its strength and its warning sign. Thailand sits lower, with Shield doing much of the stabilising work. And then the USA and Argentina are clear outliers. The United States has a mean node value of 4.1, high strength, high stress, um, and low bond strength. Argentina is even lower at 2.6. What matters is not the absolute score, it's the pattern. A society with one strong node and several collapsed nodes behaves very differently from a society that is evenly stressed. CAMS is reading topology, not just averages. Okay, the United States. The United States is labelled here as the severed head, and the phrase is deliberately stark. The data shows a system where Helm, the executive coordination function, and law, the legitimacy and meaning function, have collapsed into extreme distress. Helm has a node value of 0.4 and law is at 0.6. These are not low scores, these are terminal readings. At the same time, Shield remains comparatively strong with a node value of 10.7. This creates a geometry that we call Praetorian. The security apparatus remains functional while the slow loop institutions that should govern, legitimise and remember have lost coherence. In CAMS terms, this is dangerous because Shield begins to look like the last remaining functional centre of the system. The Mythopoetic reading is that America is still narrating its own heroic destiny, but from inside a failing architecture. The symbolic language of greatness continues, but the material and institutional coupling required to sustain that myth is breaking down. The soul archetype is the dissociative sovereign, a system still speaking in imperial, constitutional, and redemptive language, while its coordinating mind has become severed from its operating body. Let's move on to Argentina. The exhausted body. Where the United States shows asymmetry, collapsed helmet law, strong shield, Argentina shows exhaustion across the whole system. Its mean known value is 2.6. Stress is high. Affect is deeply negative. Hands, stewards, archive, and flow are all severely impaired. That is why the report calls Argentina the exhausted body. It's not a system with one dominant node taking over. It is a system approaching thermodynamic minimum, low energy, low trust, low institutional recovery. The mythopoetic signature is tragic because Argentina has long carried a story of interrupted greatness, a wealthy country that should not be poor, a sophisticated culture repeatedly betrayed by its own institutions. But in this reading, even the narrative repair mechanism is under stress. Law itself is degraded. The system remembers that it once knew how to function, but it can no longer reliably access that knowledge. That is why the archive is the abandoned archive. The archetype is the abandoned archive. All right, and now we move on to Russia. Russia is identified as the armoured mind, a very different signature. Mean node value is 8.75. Stress is significant, but less than others. Bond strength is still high. This is not a flourishing system, but it is coordinated under duress. The key point here is that Russia's Helm, archive, and law remain strongly coupled. The system draws on historical memory, siege narratives, and state continuity. CAMS does not judge whether the narrative is true, it asks whether the narrative is functionally real. And here the answer is yes. Russia's civilizational story, the state as the guardian of survival under external threat, is producing institutional coherence. The cost is effective. This is not a joyous system, it is a survival system. The soul signature is the besieged archive, a civilization that lives through memory, threat, endurance, and mobilization. The risk factor is flow. If economic circulation degrades faster than the slow loop narrative can stabilize the system, then the coherence currently visible may become brittle. The United Kingdom gets quite a positive reading in this set. The United Kingdom's archetype is the experienced keeper, and it appears here as the strongest system in the ensemble. This may surprise some readers because the UK's public narrative is often one of decline, dysfunction, and post imperial confusion. But CAMS is not reading mood alone, it is reading institutional coupling. The UK's archive node is exceptionally strong. Its legal, administrative, procedural, and memory systems remain deeply embedded. Stewards and shield are also healthy. Bond strength is high, stress is relatively low. The report's phrase is the experienced keeper. The mythopoetic reading is that Britain has survived enough of its own illusions to become, at least in this data set, more procedural than heroic. It no longer needs to believe in imperial destiny in quite the same way. It maintains forms, records, habits, and institutional memory, and that is a real adaptive asset. There is a warning. Hands, like so often, is the weakest node. The physical economy lags behind the administrative and archival structure. If that gap widens, the UK could become over archival, a society beautifully recording its own decline. But for now, it remains the patient archivist. Germany, the uncertain engineer. Germany is described as, again, the uncertain engineer. It's a very precise image. Germany's craft and archive remain strong. Its system still knows how to build, organise, document, regulate, and think procedurally. It has rebuilt itself around competence. But flow is stressed, economic circulation is the weak point, energy transition pressures, export strain, and political uncertainty appear as stress in the circulation layer. Germany's post-war identity has depended on the replacement of mythic fire with institutional competence. The bargain was no more grandiosity, instead, engineering, law, process, productivity, and order. The CAMS reading suggests that this bargain still holds, but it is under pressure. When flow falters, the material justification for procedural confidence weakens. Germany is not in collapse. It is in oscillation. It is thinking hard about its problems. The decisive question is whether that thinking can transmit into circulation before affect turns negative. The soul is one of anxious confidence. And now we move on to Sweden. Sweden is the most abstract dominant system in the ensemble. That is why the report calls it the anxious philosopher. Sweden's law is very high in abstraction. Its identity as a rational, humane, socially advanced model remains powerful. But effect is near zero or negative across parts of the system. Helms and hands show discomfort. This is a late abstraction warning. A society may continue to refine its symbolic framework while material tension accumulate underneath. Sweden's myth is the achieved utopia, the idea that a rational, high-trust social democratic society can solve modernity. And historically, that was not fantasy. It worked remarkably well. But the CAMS signature suggests a widening gap between self-image and lived strain, migration pressure, welfare load, security anxiety, energy transition, and institutional overcomplexity. The danger is not stupidity, it is excessive sophistication under stress. The system can become so committed to its model that it explains around the problem rather than adapting to it. Now we go on to an interesting example because it's an Eastern society, which I've studied quite often. In this reading, Thailand shows its most fragile uh, condition because it normally comes across as extremely resilient. But in this reading, Thailand comes across as the gilded shield. The report calls it the gilded shield because shield is the strongest and most concrete node in the system. It acts as a stabilising backbone whenever archive and Helm cannot do so. Thailand's craft is also strong. The procedural and tourism industrial base continues to function, but archive is highly abstract, stressed, and weakly coherent. That's an unusual signature, a society with deep symbolic memory, but difficulty operationalizing that memory into stable institutional continuity. The mythopoetic image is a layered palimpsest. Buddhist cosmology, monarchy, hierarchy, military management, modern industry, and pragmatic adaptation all written over one another. The CAMS reading is that Thailand has repeatedly resolved contradiction through security intervention. Shield becomes a constitutional substitute. It can stabilise the system, but it has a cost. If archive continues to weaken while shield remains the only coherent node, the system risks becoming permanently dependent on coercive coordination. When we step back, three clusters become visible. The first cluster is Russia, Sweden, and Germany. Systems in oscillation, near effective zero, but with very different cognitive styles. The second cluster is the USA and Argentina, fracture risk systems in thermodynamic strain. The third is the UK and more ambiguously Thailand. Systems where shield and institutional continuity still provide structure, although the UK is far healthier overall. The key diagnostic is slow loop failure versus fast loop survival. When slow loop, Helm law archive stewards fall below the fast loop nodes, a society loses the capacity for reflective self-repair. It may still move, produce, police, and circulate, but it no longer knows how to govern itself coherently. That is the deeper warning in the American case. By contrast, the UK's strong archive shows the stabilising power of institutional memory. Russia shows this, the stabilising power of siege narrative and state continuity. Germany shows procedural resilience. Sweden shows symbolic overextension. Thailand shows security substitution. Argentina shows exhaustion. The closing section gives us the 7 mythopoetic forms. The UK is the patient archivist. Germany is the anxious competence. Sweden is the idealistic philosopher under strain. Russia is the besieged archive, and Thailand is the gilded shield. What CAMS offers is not a new ideology, it's a way of seeing societies as living coordination systems. Systems with memory, stress, abstraction, coupling, fracture, and repair. And the value of this approach is that it allows us comparison without flattering history. Each society remains itself. Each carries its own mythology, institutions, wounds, and adaptive habits, but all can be read through the same underlying grammar of complex coordination. And that's Carrie McKern thanking you, and enjoy the report. Have a nice day.